Welcome everyone to Central Park. I'm Ariel with Urbanist, and this is a show where I explore cities all around the world, its history, food, and culture. And right now you are looking at Umpire Rock in the middle of Central Park, in the middle of New York City. And this is a natural rock formation that holds a whole lot of history. History that's more than 14,000 years old. Today we're going to talk about how the Ice Age, the last great Ice Age of 15 to 14,000 years ago, formed New York City. And we're going to talk about how it might have tied to one of the greatest cataclysms that humanity has ever experienced. So if you're watching the replay, just zoom in 2 minutes ahead. We're going to wait until people come online. Let me know where you're watching from. Share this video with your friends and family, especially if they're interested in the very interesting stories of history and the mysteries of history. And like this page if you want to see more videos like this. So right now we are looking at Umpire Rock. Contrary to popular belief, a lot of people think that Central Park is completely artificial. Well, Central Park was definitely meticulously designed by its two main architects, Frederick Law Olmsted and Culver Vaux. But there's natural formations here that weren't put here. For example, these giant boulders. These giant boulders weigh thousands of tons, impossible to move anywhere. They are natural formations sticking out of the ground of New York City. These boulders are the reason why New York City was able to grow from a tiny little town of New Amsterdam to the massive skyscrapers we know today. But in the ripples and striations of this rock, and we're particularly at the biggest one, Umpire Rock, right in the center of Central Park, right around the southwest side, close to Columbus Circle, you can learn over 15,000 years of history. So I'm Ariel with Urbanist. Let me know where you're watching from, and let me know, have you ever touched a piece of ancient prehistory? Hello Nina, your favorite place in the world. Let me show everyone where we are at. Hello Johanna. We are right by the southern end of Central Park, only a mere 5-minute walk away from Columbus Circle. We see all the buildings along 59th Street right over here, the second tallest building in New York City. Central Park already turning colors, turning yellow, and soon it'll be a beautiful hue of oranges and reds in about maybe a few days to a week. And we are by far one of the largest rocks, and you're going to see the scale as we walk all around it. You see people climbing all above it. It's a kind of popular destination to climb around, but this is called Umpire Rock. However, it also has another name. It's called Rat Rock. It's called Rat Rock because it used to be a place where rats used to swarm the entire place. That is no longer the case. Central Park has done a great job with its rat problem. But now it's back to its original name of Umpire Rock because it's this huge, massive, jutting boulder in the middle of Central Park. And Central Park is famous for its huge, picturesque boulders. But a lot of people think these boulders were imported. They were not imported. They are natural from New York City. Elena, tu lugar favorito, qué bien. Estamos aprendiendo un poco historia de la prehistoria de 15,000 años anterior. Rosa, you're so welcome. Scott, you love Central Park. Hello, Brian. Hello, Nina. Hello, Shannon. Hello, Nadine. Hello, Sharon. Hello, Elena. Hello, Michael. Hello, Kay. Hello, Susan. Hello, Nicola. Hello, Michael. Hello, Alda, Sabina, and everyone. Welcome. Nice to see you here. Okay, everyone. Welcome to the broadcast. So, 15,000 years ago. 15,000 years ago, we don't know much about that time, at least with human history. Humans were around. Humans been around for more than 1 million years. But that was a time of history where we consider prehistory. Before there was ever really a written word as far as we know. Before there was even major architecture as far as we know. But something happened 15,000 years ago. Where I'm standing right now, today where we are all at, in Central Park, we wouldn't be standing at this elevation. Let's look at the buildings all around us, the skyscrapers. Specifically, let me show you this one skyscraper over here. You see that skyscraper right over there? That's the second tallest building in all of New York City. It's almost the same length as the Freedom Tower, standing at 1,700 feet tall. It's a huge skyscraper, one of the new mega tall structures appearing all around New York City. Well, that super tall mega skyscraper was about 1,000 feet away from what used to be lying right above New York City. All around us, if we were to go back 15,000 years ago, would be almost 2,000 feet or higher of ice. None of this would be around. We would just be literally ice. All the way taller than any skyscraper built today. That's how much ice there was in New York City. That's how much ice there was all around the North American continent and in huge swaths of Asia. But what happened with that ice? Why are we standing here? Why is there not 2 miles of ice above us now? Well, that was because that was during the Ice Age. 15,000 years ago, ice covered a majority of the world. As I mentioned, most of North America, huge swaths of Asia, and also huge swaths of the South Hemisphere. But then something happened. The world got significantly cooler suddenly. And then only a mere 100 years later, the temperatures skyrocketed and became significantly warm. The ice started melting, and as the ice started melting all around the North American continental ice sheet started sliding down the continent. Suddenly, rocks and boulders started tumbling down. The ground that was pressed under 2 miles of ice started rising up. A huge slush of clay, rock, stone, all these different materials started combining together, sending a huge mudslide all along the North American continent. If you go to areas like Montana or North Dakota and you take a helicopter or fly a drone above the plains, what you end up seeing is ripples. Ripples, just like ones we see here. Let's take a closer look. Hello, Francisco. World famous Central Park. Indeed, it is. It is world famous Central Park. So let's see, from here we see ripples. So usually whenever there's ripples in a geological site, on the ground or anywhere, they come from water. These ripples are very pronounced, and hence that's why a lot of people come over here to Umpire Rock and the boulders in Central Park. Now, if you ever played in the sand when you were little, maybe at the beach or some shore of some kind, and you put water on the sand and then kind of slide the water off, what do you notice? There'll be ripples in the sand. Here there are ripples on the rock, and these ripples on the rock are from when the ice caps were melting off and literally sliding down the melting ice sheets, and water was rushing through the rock, forming all these striations that we see here that you can touch today. These were formed anywhere between 15 to 13,000 years ago, back in 11,000 BC. We're touching ancient history right here. But back to Montana, back to North Dakota. If you were to take a drone above or a helicopter above, what you would see in the plains, you would see these massive, gigantic ripples. Ripples that you can't really touch with your hand because they'll be the size of Central Park. That's how big the ripples are in those areas of the northern United States. So, what does this have to do with a cataclysm? Well, what happened to all that water? What happened to all those rocks and mud? That brings us to one of the greatest, most persistent myths that we know all around. So let's walk around the rock, and we'll get to that part of the story as we explore a little bit more of the rock. So we see the striations all around here. Some of them are more pronounced. This is ancient history right here. These striations were not formed by rain or ice, merely the rain or ice or snow or hurricanes that hit New York City in the past 100 years. But no, this is ancient history. This is 15,000 years of history that we're looking at with our own very eyes. Hello Marie, hello Sadiq, hello Glenda, hello Regis, hello Jane. Kay, Doctor Who was filmed here. Actually, it's kind of fitting that Doctor Who was filmed here. So, just for scale, let's step a little bit back. You see the little kid climbing. That's how big the rock is. The rock is huge. There's a man practicing his own climbing on the side of the rock right over there. And you see the building right behind it. That's how much ice was covering New York City 15,000 years ago. That high, even higher. To think about that gives me goosebumps, because to me, I'm not really a rock climber. This type of rock seems huge to me. I won't even try to attempt to climb this. But to imagine the sheer scale of 2,000 feet of ice, it's kind of, I can't even process it. It gives me goosebumps. It makes me feel almost insignificant. And imagine the humans living during that time who were starting to spread all around the world. They were from starting apparently crossing the Bering Strait over to North America, all the way in Europe and Africa and Asia, all down to Australia. Humans were already well spread around the world, but imagine the humans that might have seen these ice shelves. It must have been insane, huge scale of a sight to see. You would feel almost insignificant as a puny human standing to this massive wall of ice. Whatever you see in Game of Thrones with the wall beyond the wall that goes all the way to the very north, that pales in comparison to what existed here before. All right, let's keep walking around the rock. Are there climbers? Yes, there's a few people climbing, kids climbing. There's a guy trying to practice rock climbing. It goes by the name Rat Rock. Well, Mikhail, yes it does, but that used to be because rats used to swarm it. That is not really much longer the case. The original name is Umpire Rock because of its size in Central Park. And thank you so much for tuning in, Mikhail and Tim. Where's the Balto statue? It's further down. I might cover it soon, so stay tuned for that, but we're pretty far away from it. Today I won't be covering it, but it is on the eastern side of Central Park. And hello Václav, hello Francis. And Nicola says, this is very educational. I'm glad. If you know anyone covering ancient, if you know any Facebook pages that cover ancient history, share this video with them right now, or any pages that cover geology or any type of natural history. Well, let me show you right now an example of what happened with the weather. So this is a graph of how the weather fluctuation. Actually, I should show you the other side. Show you the other side. Wait up. Have to maneuver around here. It's impressive seeing all these rocks also. Okay, here's a lot better. All right, there we go. I love rocks. They are a natural tripod for me. That is amazing. All right, everyone. So just to show you the huge scale of temperature change. Today, we are living through a time where people are, to be blunt, they're losing their shit. They're losing their shit because global warming is taking over. It's the sixth massive extinction of Earth. When you start studying prehistory and ancient history, you start realizing that whatever's happening today kind of pales in comparison to what has happened before. So let me show you a little bit of a overall timeline of the temperature changes on Earth as long as humanity has been here. So humanity has been here for more than a million years, but only in the past 15,000 years, this is the massive temperature fluctuations we have here. This line represents the modern temperature. This is today. Right now, global warming is happening, so it's kind of going just a bit up. But to comparison, the medieval warm period back in around the 1100s was pretty high. People were growing wine in Britain. There was a little ice age in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, where most of Northern Europe got too cold, and that's when the Vikings started invading mainland Europe. But this, we go all the way back to our sudden cooling. Our sudden cooling, the world cooled instantaneously and then warmed back again. That is called the Younger Dryas Era, because the Younger Dryas was a plant that disappeared in the northern hemisphere and came back suddenly once the temperatures rose. But look at that huge, massive increase in temperatures. So this ties to another major event. The mystery with all of this is mammoths have been found frozen all around North America. And mammoths ruled the lands in the north all around. Over 100 species of different mammoths, mammoths and subspecies of mammoths were all around. Over 1,000 species of mega mammals were around. Mammals that we can't even conceive of today. Giant sloths, lions that were more than 6 feet tall, almost the size of a horse, saber-toothed tigers with huge teeth, giant bears, giant beavers, squirrels that were at least 2 or 3 times the size we see today, bears that almost pale in comparison to the grizzly bears we have today, bears that were much larger, almost 2 times larger. What happened to all these mega mammals? Well, that's the mystery. Because the mystery gets even more intriguing. A few decades ago, they found a few young woolly mammoths, kids, that were frozen all the way in the top of Siberia. However, this is not so strange because, you know, animals get frozen all the time. They get frozen all the time if they get lost or temperatures change over the matter of weeks, and then they just kind of tire of exhaustion and just die and freeze. Not with this young woolly mammoth. This young woolly mammoth still was eating food, and it froze to death. That's rather strange. Until they started finding more and more woolly mammoths that were frozen nearly instantaneously. Still eating food, still running around. Megafauna have been found where their legs seem to be crushed while they were still roaming the earth, while they were still walking around. That is rather strange for the classic narrative that we have where temperatures change over the course of 1,000 years and humans killed off the woolly mammoth because we hunted them all. That's quite not viable, because there were thousands of species of megafauna. There were hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of mammoths roaming the northern hemisphere. It is impossible, because there was more mammoths than humans at a certain point 15,000 years ago. It is impossible for humans to have hunted and eaten every single mammoth. There are fields in Siberia with thousands of mammoths lying frozen, uneaten, uninjured by human weapons. Humans were not responsible for this. No matter how much as humans claim to have responsibility for a lot of things that happen in environments, we weren't responsible for the destruction of the mammoths. We weren't responsible for destruction over 1,000 different mega mammals all around the world that were much larger than us, much more dangerous than us, and much more numerous than us at the time. We humans think we're special, but we weren't. So what happened 15,000 years ago when all these mammoths and all these mega bears and all these mega lions and all these mega huge giant beavers and giant sloths disappeared? What happened? Well, there's one very convincing theory. That asteroid impact hit the 2 miles of ice that were right here all along North America. Now, why don't we have a huge, massive asteroid crater? Well, because the North American ice sheet was 2 miles, up to 2 miles high, 2,000 feet high here in New York City, taller than the skyscrapers that we see today. So much water and ice would not leave a crater, but the destruction would be massive. It would be so massive that this impact would instantaneously melt the ice, and the mice would start swarming down New York City, which we can touch here today. So, alright, so a massive asteroid might have hit and melted the Atlantic ice sheet, forming all the rocks we see here. Hello Debbie, hello Angela, I'm doing well, thank you so much. Vendi, is it true that Central Park was designed so the traffic flows over it and maintains the quietness? Not really, because Central Park was designed before the car was ever invented. So they designed certain roadways to make the quietness of the horse and carriage make it a little bit quieter, but not really for cars or for trucks. And hello Michelle, and hello everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm Ariel with Urbanist, and we are looking right now at Umpire Rock in Central Park. Beautiful Central Park right by Billionaires Row. It's a rock with over 15,000 years of history, and right by a few baseball fields and everything. So, why do we have Central Park? Let's jump back into the 1800s. Why do we have Central Park? Why do we have Washington Square Park? Why do we have Union Square? Why do we have Prospect Park? Why do we have Calvary Cemetery? Why do we have all these green areas? Well, back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, a lot of these lands were deemed horrible for land building. Very soft ground, muddy mixture of different elements that weren't conducive to building structures on top of it. And then once we hit the late 1800s and the boom of the skyscrapers came, we definitely couldn't build in any of these lands. So lands like we know of Central Park were very cheap. And by being very cheap and very undesirable for anyone that wanted to construct anything, they became parklands. And that's why we have parklands all along the center-ish of Manhattan. And then we have a line of green along Queens and Brooklyn. If you ever look at a map of Queens and Brooklyn, you'll notice that all the green parks are around the center. But why is that? Why do we have parks in the center of these two islands? Well, it also dates back to the Ice Age. Because as ice started melting, rivers of ice, melted ice, started flowing. And these rivers of ice started concentrating in certain areas of land, as water normally does. When you throw it onto a surface, it starts going in certain streams, and that's how rivers are formed, that's how lakes are formed, that's how streams and creeks and etc. are formed. Well, the same thing happened with the ice melting, and the ice melted along these ridges, the continental ice sheet ridges all along the center of Queens and Brooklyn and the center of Manhattan, right where we have our parks today. So the reason New York City is the way it is was shaped by the ice that melted 15,000 years ago. But then there's more. What happened with the asteroid that might have hit? Why did all these thousands of megafauna suddenly disappear? And so what happened with the impact from such an asteroid? Well, that brings us to another major myth. A myth that is known all around the world. A myth that people throw away usually as fiction, as mere superstition, as mere stories that people like to insert scary, fearful horror at the insignificance of humans. But the interesting thing is, as with most myths, there's always a little ounce of truth. So you see people, this is a popular destination, that's why a lot of people hang out here. You see a lot of people on top. Debbie, you're such a wealth of knowledge, very impressive. Thank you so much, Debbie. Well, all these, a portion of these tours are heavily researched, so I do take my time to research because I love it. So here we could see the striations a lot more impressively. Look at this. I just cannot get from the fact that I am touching, right now you are seeing me touching, you can touch it yourself, 15,000 years of history. Have fossils been found in New York City? I'm not entirely sure. That I don't know for sure. I love the way you describe things and provide info. Oh, I'm so glad, Jackie. If you enjoy it and you know any Facebook groups of ancient history, prehistory that's relevant to today's topic, share it with them. So, what is this great myth that I'm talking about that a lot of people throw away as common superstition? Well, hear me out for a second. And as I mentioned before, I am not a journalist. I am not an academic. So whatever I talk about, do your own research. I do this mostly for entertainment, but I do have a great love for history, and I tend to be a very open-minded person. And I love when history, because I think when history gets very spicy is when you read these stories that challenge you, challenge what you have learned, challenge what you have been taught in your schools. So growing up as a Catholic, in Catholic schools, and many Christians have experienced this as well, we have learned the myth of Noah's Ark. And Christians not alone, also Jewish people and also Muslims, all learn about the myth of Noah's Ark. The myth of Noah's Ark is about a man who decided to build this great ship and house two of each animal. Depends on the reading of the myth. He housed a bunch of animals, try to save them all. But that's not the part of the myth I find interesting. The part of the myth I find interesting is why he decided to build a massive ship with all these animals. It was because he knew, and who knows how he knew, some of the myths, they say he was divined by God. Some of the myths said that he saw the decadence of humanity at the time and he knew something bad was going to happen and he asked God for confirmation. That doesn't matter for today's story. What matters to today's story is that there was a great flood. A flood that encompassed the entire earth. Flood that destroyed lands that we have never even heard of. Maybe even cities, maybe even villages, maybe even cultures, whatever. It destroyed a whole lot. And destroyed animals. Animals that we couldn't even imagine living today. As I mentioned, such as the giant beaver. Okay, so a lot of people say this great myth flood, it's common Judeo-Christian myth, superstition. However, it gets very interesting because then you start reading the myths in India of Manu. In Africa, various legends of a great flood that encompassed the earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh, and the ancient Babylonian texts that talked about a massive rush of water all along the lands. And then you go all the way to China, and there's also even more legends about a great flood. And then you talk to the Aboriginals in Australia, and they talk about a great flood, and they tend to be a lot more specific when the great flood took place. They tend to say that the great flood took place around 15,000 years ago, around anywhere 15 and 13,000 years ago, 13,000 years ago. That's when they say the great flood took place. You read the texts of Plato, and Plato mentions of a great flood that happened 13,000 years ago. So, imagine a comet hits the North American ice sheets. We're buried under 2 miles of ice right now. What happens when you have a huge burning cauldron of space debris hitting a bunch of ice? Well, naturally that ice would start melting, and very rapidly. Now, to put it into context, a lot of people think that asteroids are some fanciful thing that happens every couple of 100,000 years ago. No, we live in a universe that is surrounded by debris that's flying everywhere. We have an asteroid belt a few hundreds of thousands, millions of miles away from us. I have no idea, but you can correct me on that. Many millions of miles away from us. Asteroids normally hit any planetary object here. You can just go up later tonight, whenever there's a full moon, look up at the moon, and what you'll see? A bunch of holes on the moon. All those holes on the moon come from asteroids. Asteroids is fairly common. There was, for the most recent example of asteroid, was one that hit in the area of Siberia a few years ago, and it was capturing a lot of taxi cabs. And this was a tiny little asteroid that hit Siberia and made windows crash 100 miles away. Some people had their eardrums popped who lived in the vicinity of a few tens of miles away. Lights of flashes were recorded in cameras all along Russia. And this was a comet, maybe about 100th, maybe 1,000th of the size of the comet that might have hit right here in North America. So ice melts quickly. The temperatures start plummeting because first the Earth gets completely cooled down and then starts rising very rapidly. Naturally, with all this water coming from melted ice water all along the North American ice sheet, water starts flooding all around the world. Some estimates to people who have been studying this theory say that the water could have risen up to 400 feet tall. Now, mind you, it is pretty well accepted that there was over 2,000 feet of ice in most of North America. We have proof of it from the photos we can see in helicopter photos of the plains of South Dakota and Montana. We can see the ripples. We can touch the ripples here. There was a bunch of water. Where did that water go? The normal narrative that we have now, the one that's pretty agreed upon, is that it melted over the course of a few thousand years. But now more and more studies have been coming out that it melted in a flash. So you have over 400 feet of water rushing in. Now, to put it into context, a lot of us think that a few feet, 5 feet of water in the rising sea levels is catastrophic. Imagine 400. 400 is about the size of, let's see, that building right there. That one. That's how tall 400 feet is. So if this happened, if the water melted that quickly, and if the ice melted that quickly, and water started rushing all around the world, and there was a massive flood, over 400 feet of water, then why are we not talking more about this? Well, there's a few reasons why. And I think the reason I wanted to take you here today is because by actually touching it, you start to realize maybe there's more to this story. Juan, you're so welcome for the live post. I'm so glad I can share it with you. And hello, G. Gemont from the Canaries. And with some of the parks used in burial grounds in the past. Okay, yes, they were. A lot of the parks were used as burial grounds. So any land that was very cheap because it wasn't great to build on was used for burial grounds. And then subsequently in the mid-1800s, since a lot of people wanted more parks, they started building over the burial grounds and using them as parks. So a lot of parks that we know today in New York City were burial grounds at some point. And in the middle of Brooklyn and Queens, a lot of the burial grounds, the major cemeteries like Calvary Cemetery, Greenpoint Cemetery, are right next to major parks like Prospect Park. And the reason is because there's a huge ridge called the Terminal Moraine, which is this ridge from all the melted ice water that created this mush of land that's not ideal for construction. Is it known how deep the rock is in the ground? Ooh, I'm not entirely sure. That's a great question. I would assume this rock, we're only looking at a fraction of what we see. And And Debbie, you say, Ariel, you should come to Los Angeles to the La Brea tar pits. Oh yes, there's a lot of stuff in there. I would love to go to La Brea. And Chris, always great reporting as always. And Daisy, love all the info. I'm so glad. Okay, so why don't we know much about this moment of history? Well, one, human cultures, at least the ones that might have survived, we don't know how many passed away or died. A lot of them didn't really have too much of a written language, so there wasn't really like any much written accounts. There was oral accounts that might have translated into the myths that we hear today, and as I mentioned before, almost every single myth that we hear today, I think literally every single myth we learn today has some truth in it, because how can you make the myth in the first place? It's nearly impossible to make a story that's entirely fictional, because there is no such thing as complete fiction. Whatever we say, even in fiction, has an ounce of truth in it. Even the most exaggerated, outlandish sci-fi movies are based on some truth. You can take a movie like The Dark Knight Rises, for example. Dark Knight, for example, that came out about 15 years ago. It's about a fictional character called Batman. There was never been a Batman. There's never been really a vigilante that does that type of stuff. But if you extract all the other history and don't know anything about what happened in America at the time, you can deduce that there was a shift in American politics during the mid-2000s just by seeing the film The Dark Knight. That's how powerful fiction is. Same thing applies to myth. We might hear myths of gods and angels and demons and great floods and great cataclysms. They all have an ounce of truth. So, no written word. Another thing is, there's no crater impact. There's no crater impact because there was over 2,000 feet of ice. A lot of ice. All that ice stopped the crater from impacting. That ice melted. There was no evidence found of any crater ever hitting, any crater being formed in North America. That's another reason. The third reason is it's kind of inconceivable from our modern human psyche to think of an event this drastic, because we never really lived through it in modern history. We can't conceive of 400 feet rise in sea level. It's huge. 400 feet rise in sea level would destroy New York City, would bury New York City in water. If you have tsunamis that are only a mere 10 feet tall, destroying entire cities in Japan and Indonesia in the past 20 years, imagine 400 feet of water. 400 feet of water would literally destroy New York City. That skyscraper you see right there, that skyscraper might actually collapse from all that rush of water. Probably will. So, what happened to all this extra land that was buried underwater? Well, think of this. This is where the story gets even more interesting. This is where I am doing a whole lot of speculation, and I am been reading a whole lot of speculation. So don't do your own research before you tell this to anyone, and don't use this in the academic space or journalistic space. But this is where it gets interesting. Where do a lot of cities reside? Where are we residing right now in New York City? Where are we in New York City? Where is Beijing? Where is Shanghai? Where is Johannesburg? Where is London? Where is Paris? Where is Buenos Aires? Where are all these cities? Where are 90% of the largest cities around the world? Where are they located? Let me know. Where are they located? Let me know in the comments. What is the one constant in 90% of the major cities around the world? Donna, you are correct. By water. All of them are either at the mouth of rivers or along the coasts. As I mentioned, not just the cities I mentioned, but Sydney, Dubai, Mumbai, the list goes on and on and on and on and on. So if over 90% of cities around the world are based right by water, and a lot of them are right around sea level, and some of them are actually under sea level, like Amsterdam and parts of New York City, then what happened to all the land that might have come from that great flood, from that massive cataclysm? Again, speculation. We don't actually know. But if there were humans living around those harbors and waters, and if would be kind of a stretch to say, they probably definitely were, because any human civilization was always based right by water. And there are maps of the lands that surrounded New York City, for example. Manhattan was a lot fatter. Florida was almost twice the size because there was a lot less water. Most of it was frozen in the ice sheets. So once that water flooded the earth, what happened to all those coastal areas and all the humans that lived there? What cultures could we have lost? Think of this. If there was an asteroid today that hit the North Pole or hit Antarctica, we will also have a massive rise in sea levels. Maybe not as much as 400 feet because we don't have that much ice today because the temperatures are much higher on average. But we would have maybe 50 feet of rise in sea levels, 100 feet. If we were to have anywhere above 10 feet rise in sea levels, 90% of the cities would be destroyed. You'll have water surrounding all that we see around here. That's kind of crazy to think about. So who knows what more of humanity was around 13,000 years ago? What was lost? And another reason a lot of people don't dare to ask that question is because of one counter question. Why don't we find stuff along the coasts? Why don't we find structures or skyscrapers or buildings or huts or weapons or whatever humans might have used at that time? Whatever level of technology, we actually don't know the extent of technology or how little technology they have. We have no clue. But why is it not there? Why don't we find it in the ocean beds of New York? Why don't we find it in the ocean beds along Indonesia, where there was a massive piece of land that really covered most of the waterways all around Indonesia and Malaysia? Why isn't there anything there? Well, let's go back to another story I talked about in New York City a few weeks ago, and I talked about also a few months ago. The Titanic. Titanic, everyone knows, is this massive ship that sunk in 1912. Thousands of pounds of steel and a bunch of other material crashing down into the ocean bed. The Titanic crashed back in 1912, over 100 years ago. Right now, 100 years later, from what they have gone down into the submarines and investigated the Titanic, only about 30% of the Titanic is still there. 30%. That's it. The rest has disappeared into the ocean, become part of the ocean. You leave a car outside, even during the course of 20 years, that car basically starts turning into the ground. The earth and nature reclaims all. So whatever might have been left over the course of 13,000 years is not going to be there. All except one thing: stone. And the interesting thing is stone structures have been found on the bases of the Mediterranean, on the bases of the Indonesian coastline. Though that's more for another speculative broadcast. But there's a lot of questions here. And with all those questions, I think it's really damn cool that one of the greatest, most horrific cataclysms that humanity has ever witnessed, that we can touch it with our own hands right now, here at these rocks. I think that's kind of a very impressive feat of nature to leave us a reminder of how the world was way, way back then. And for this Halloween season, I decided to tell this story rather than any other haunted story in New York City, because I think nothing can get scarier than this. Nothing is scarier than the power of nature, not just here on Earth by rising temperatures or ice ages or rising sea levels. But it's also scary to know what's above, beyond the skies, beyond our atmosphere, and the huge planetary objects and debris that fly around and can crash on this Earth at any moment. And I think that's not a time to find so much fear, because if that much is out of our control currently, and maybe soon in humanity's history we can start getting control of anything that could harm us from outside. But since we're living in this time now and we're unable to control even the greatest of cataclysms, then why worry about this tiny little simple drudgery of life? It kind of puts everything into perspective. So that's my story of the greatest cataclysm that humanity has ever experienced, as told here at Umpire Rock in Central Park, which you can visit today. You can visit yourself here, only a 5-minute walk away from Columbus Circle, right on the western edge of Central Park in New York City. I'm Ariel with Urbanist. If you enjoyed this story, press that heart button. Let me know. If you have any remaining questions, I'll stick around for about 10 more minutes. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in for this story. I really appreciate you listening and sharing. That's so awesome. I hope you enjoyed it. And let me show you a little bit more of the rock, and feel free to ask any more questions. And it seems to be today birthday of a follower of George. George, happy birthday, George. George has been a hardcore urbanist for the past almost a year at this point. Ooh, I had a branch fall down. So everyone press that heart button to George as well. Tell George happy birthday. That's so awesome. Happy birthday, George. Thank you so much for tuning in on your birthday. That's so awesome. I hope you really enjoy it. And Doris, hello. The same thing happened as our current sea levels will rise. Well, you know, Jackie, the reason I emphasize the height of the sea levels is because what's happening today pales in comparison. The rise in sea levels, I think, is only like 5 feet, maybe even less than that. What people might have experienced 15,000 years ago was 400 feet. So it is quite a big difference. What's happening today kind of pales in comparison. And Kay, I'm so glad you love my coat. And hello, Carmel. Wilma, you're lying on the ground. Colleen, you're watching from Seattle. That's so awesome. And George, you used to have birthday parties on Halloween, I can imagine. And brilliant information as always. Thank you so much, Kay. And Wilma, you're so welcome. Nice piece of philosophy combined with history. Oh, that's my specialty. And Wilma, hello, and happiest of birthdays, says Donna. Oh, happy birthday, George. And Doris, that's my kid's favorite place in the park. Ooh, amazing. yeah, it attracts a lot of kids. I've seen a whole lot of them. And Gail, you really enjoyed my video, learned a lot. And Doris, thank you so much for the hearts. And yeah, this is the rock. There's a big ridge here in the center. That's why a lot of people love it. It's kind of different. And overall, the rock is super smooth. So you can see the striations of the water, but it's smooth also because of the water.
I've done that for some agencies and they have nothing open.
And there we go. Beautiful views here too of the playground below. Jean, you're late. No worries. I finished my story. If you want to catch the story, go to the beginning of the broadcast after it's ended. It's very epic. And way back when the Earth became a giant snowball for millions of years. Oh, George, yeah, I did talk all about that. And I'm glad you're a stone expert, so you might be able to add a little bit more information to what I talked about. And Kay, Hoboken anytime soon? Maybe. I'm not really sure. I haven't, maybe. I haven't thought about doing New Jersey, but maybe. Time to go back. And Dawn, 5 more weeks and you'll be here to experience this amazing wonderland. Ooh, amazing! I'm glad. And Gail, amazing to visit Central Park one day. Hell yes. And sirens, yes, sirens are heard around. And have you heard of the square census, Doris? Doris, I have not heard of it. I saw a headline, but I did not read it, so I gotta check that out. That's interesting that they're censusing these squirrels. I hope squirrels keep on thriving because they're such a beautiful species. If you want to see more videos like this, press that like button, and once you press that like button, our videos will pop up right on your feed. If you want to be alerted when I'm live, press that. Go to the instructions to get notified are right in the description of this video post. And you can find the instructions on how to get notified while we're live. Basically go to notification options and click see first and all live posts, and you'll get notified whenever we're live. Some of these live videos are done very impromptu because I am just in the rush of inspiration that I just end up talking about ancient prehistory out of nowhere, and I think that's the beauty of following Urbanist. So I'm not as planned as other live video channels, but it's worth it because sometimes I do the most interesting random stories. And if you want to take a tour, I am running private tours for the next 2 months here in New York City. If you want to take a tour with me, private, personalized for you, in whatever neighborhood, food, or museum you would like to experience, you can go to urbanist.live/tours and find out more information there. And if you want to support Two Urbanists, if you enjoy these videos and watching vicariously and want to see 360 video versions of these places, you can go to become a supporter right on the Facebook page. The link is also in the comments, or you can see a little green button right there. Become a supporter, you'll get the badge, and also you'll get access to weekly 360 videos, and you'll help support Urbanists so I can keep making better and better and better and better videos like this. Keep being awesome, everyone, and keep on exploring through the middle of Central Park from Umpire Rock. All of you are awesome. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.